everybody, welcome back to People in the Environment. This is Unit 2 and we're talking about the assessments here. This unit comprises both KLE online resources, of which this video is a part, that you can access in your own time, and also there'll be a live Microsoft Teams session. That's going to happen next week and we can use that for face-to-face discussion. If you have any questions, I'll answer those for you in that session. So welcome to Unit 2, where we're going to be talking about the assessments that you're doing for people and the environment. Now, throughout your degree programme, you're going to be encountering lots of different types of assessments. And some of these assessments, for example, the dissertation or independent study project that you'll be doing at third year, those involve elements that you'll pick up by doing assessments at lower levels. So, for example, as part of your dissertation, you will include a literature review. And literature reviews are something that, when students encounter them for the first time at third year, they come as a bit of a shock. So, sensible institutions, such as ours, we introduce a literature review as an assessment as part of an introductory module to introduce you to the idea of a literature review long before you have to do one as part of your dissertation. So in this module you encounter a couple of, in fact, new forms of assessment for a lot of students. First of all, the literature review, and secondly the workbook, which you'll complete as you progress through the module. And each of those, the literature review essay and the workbook that you complete as you move through the module, each of those is worth 50% of the total assessment for the module. Now, those are both learning assessments, if you like, rather than just test assessments. And what I mean by that is that we aren't using those assessments just to find out how good you are and give you a mark. We're using those assessments to help you to learn. So part of the progress that you make by working your way through the module is to do with things that you learn by doing these assessment activities. So doing a literature review isn't just a test of how well you can do a literature review. Doing a literature review, for many of you for the first time, is an act of learning how to do a literature review. So these are assessments for learning, not just assessments for testing. And what we're going to do in this session is just talk about how those assessments work and make sure that you've got a good idea of what would be the best way of how to approach those assessments. So you already know the details of how the module works. If you're not sure about those, then go back and have another look at the module handbook. They're on the KLE. You should by now be familiar with those, but if you're not, then have another look, or by all means ask questions and we'll try and help. And you'll have seen from the module details that, as I just said, the assessment involves two components. First of all, a literature review essay, and secondly, a workbook of short answer exercises. The literature review essay has a 2,000 word word count maximum, with the usual 10% leeway that GGE offers, plus a reference list, and that takes up half of your assessment. And the short answer exercises are short, as it says, short answers, short questions that you can provide short answers to week by week as you work your way through the module. I'll actually say more about the workbook in the session at the end of week 2 when we have our first live Teams meeting. So let's say a little bit first of all about the literature review essay. Say 2,000 words maximum plus a reference list, half of the module total marks. And don't forget, you should be using the GGE house style, or the geography house style that some of you will have encountered last semester. You should be following that house style as you produce this work, and you can see the module handbook for details of where you can find that house style if you're not already familiar with it. So just a few basic points first of all, just to make sure you know what you're doing. First of all, the title. The title of your literature review will be the title of the session that you're using as a starting point, or the topic that you're using as a starting point, which you take from the session list for the module, colon, a literature review. So if you're doing something from a session called Humans in the Environment, then your literature review essay would be called Humans in the Environment, colon, a literature review. And I guess that's a big difference between the standard kind of essay that you'll have written before and this literature review essay, in that previously you might have written essays where the relationship between people in the environment, or drumlins, or some other topic in geography has itself been the topic of what you're writing your essay about. In a literature review essay, it isn't the drumlins or the human-environment relationship which is the topic of the essay. The topic is the literature that has been written about drumlins, or the literature that has been written about people-environment relationships, and you're writing an essay about that literature. You're reviewing the literature more than reviewing the topic itself. The deadline is in the handbook. Make sure you meet that deadline, obviously, and like I said before, make sure you follow the house style. There's a word count limit. Follow that limit. If you must, then there's a 10% leeway under the current house style rules for geography, so you do have that 10% leeway if you do spill just a little bit over the word limit, but it's better, obviously, if you can follow the rules and stick to the limits. The marking criteria and the grading scheme likewise are available on the KLE, so make sure you have a look at those as you're doing the work to make sure that you understand exactly what you're going to be marked on. The criteria are not dissimilar from the criteria that you will have had previously for essays that you've written in your degree, all to do with clarity, completeness, detail, etc. But have a look at those, and if you have any questions about those, then that's the kind of thing you could sensibly ask about in our live session at the end of next week. In terms of marking, if you have a geography tutorial group as part of the module esc10041, then as your essays in first semester were, your essay for this module will be handled through that tutorial group, so you can get support from your tutor there, and the marking and the submission deadline will also be set through that tutorial group. If you don't have a geography tutorial group, because you're not doing that module esc10041, then I will act as your tutor for that module. So if you're doing this module as part of an environmental science degree, for example, rather than as part of a geography degree, then I will be essentially your point of help and your point of support as you're working your way through this module. And the deadline for those students who are using me as that point of support, well, the deadline is given in the module handbook, so you can check that there. And as always, if you have any questions, just get in touch and please ask. And that really is the final point on this page. They're getting support. If you have a geography tutorial group, then the first person to talk to probably about this essay would be your geography tutorial group tutor. If you don't have a geography tutorial group, then I will act as your tutor for the purposes of this module and this essay. So by all means, just come and ask me or drop me an email if you have any questions at all as you're preparing this literature review essay, and I will try to help. Okay, so a little bit more about the literature review essay. First of all, what is a literature review? What's the difference between a literature review and a standard essay? Well, like I said before, with a standard essay, you're given a topic and you write an essay about that topic. You tell me all about drumlins, or you tell me all about wind turbines, or whatever it might be. A literature review is similar in that you're writing an essay about a topic, but the topic of your essay is the literature itself. So you're not telling me about wind turbines, you're telling me about what literature has been produced about wind turbines and what that literature says. Inevitably, in doing that, you'll have to tell me something about wind turbines, otherwise I won't really get to grips with the story of the literature about wind turbines. But the real focus of your essay is the literature. That's what you're telling me about, the literature, the literature that has been previously produced on this topic, not just the topic itself. And a mistake that students at this stage often fall into is that instead of providing a literature review, which is a narrative essay about the literature, instead of doing that, they provide something which we more commonly would call an annotated bibliography. We don't want one of them. We don't want an annotated bibliography. An annotated bibliography is essentially a list of lots of things that have been written about a topic, and then for each item, this book, this paper, this article, this book, you then provide a little paragraph saying, this book was like this and it said that. This paper was like this and it said that. This article was like this and it said that. And you provide this long list of items that have been written about a topic, and for each item on the list you then provide a little bit of a description. We don't want that. That's what we would call an annotated bibliography. Bibliography is a list of the books or the papers that are relevant to a topic, and you annotate it with your paragraphs. Don't want one of them. We want a literature review, which is much more of a narrative story where, like an essay, like the regular essays that you wrote last semester, you start off with an introduction, you have middle sections with each covering an important topic to do with your literature review, and then you have a conclusion and you have a reference list at the end where you give me the full references for any of the sources and the literature items that you cited in your essay. Now, you will have encountered literature reviews before, whether you realise it or not, because whenever you look at whenever you've looked at published research papers previously, papers where they published an article saying, there was this important problem, so we went out and we did some research, and this is what we found as a result. typically, almost always in those papers, there's a section early on which is essentially a literature review, because that's the way research stories work. People say, oh, we went and did this research. The reason we did this research is because previously someone had done that and they found this, and someone else wrote a book about that and they said this. Other people did this work and they published this paper that said that. Therefore, we're now going to do this and find something out. And that bit where they're saying, oh, these previous people did this and they found that and these people said that and a lot of people have written up like that, but that's the literature review within their paper. Likewise, when you come to do your independent study project or your dissertation later on, you'll have a section like that where you say, well, I'm doing this project on this topic, and previously people have said all these kinds of things and they've approached it in these kinds of ways, and this is what the literature before was like. And now here's what I'm doing, adding into that literature. So a literature review is an important part of a research project or a research program, and we're learning now to do it because it's an important thing that you'll be doing later on as well. So just for an exercise, you can pause the video and try this for yourselves when I've gone through this slide, but just take some time to think about this. Just want to kind of break down that title and do a little trial exercise. So you've got your actual title now. It's the title from one of the lecture sessions, colon, a literature review. So you're taking the topic from one of the units in this module and you're going to do a literature review about that particular topic, whatever it might be. You can choose from any of the units. The list is in the handbook and the instructions about the title are in the handbook as well. So your actual title is very straightforward. But I want you to think behind that actual title to see, well, what's that really asking you for? And what it's asking you for is to answer a kind of hidden question or an invisible question, which is just embedded in that word, in that phrase, literature review. And the real question that's being asked is, what do you think? What's your opinion? What's your evaluation? What have you got to say about the literature that has previously been produced around this topic? So I'm not asking you what you think of drumlins. I'm asking you what you think of the literature that has previously been produced. What's that literature like? What does it do? What does it say? What does it mean? Where does it take us to? What's it all about? Now, if you find that should be very straightforward, but if you're finding it difficult, then you can always practice by just thinking about something you're already keen on or familiar with. Think of a favourite movie or a film star or a musical band or a novel you've read or whatever. Think of something that you already know about and that you're interested in. And imagine that I ask you to do two things. First of all, I imagine that I'm asking you to write a review of that movie. And so you would say, I've seen this great movie, love it, I like the way it does this, I like this, I don't like that. And it's very effective in the way it does this, and it connects to other movies in these ways. And you write an essay reviewing the movie. Great. Then suppose I say, well, review the literature about that movie. And you say, well, lots of critics have previously reviewed this movie. Half of them like it, but half of them hate it. The reason that a lot of the previous reviews have enjoyed this movie is because, but a lot of authors have said that this movie is rubbish because, on balance, the literature says this, that, and the other. And you're telling me, not so much about the movie, you're telling me about the literature about the movie. So if I say, well, what do the critics think of your favourite band? And you don't then tell me about the band, you tell me what music critics think about the band, which is a slightly different angle on the topic. So maybe just go away and try and do that. Just try doing that. Pause the video and just try doing that with something that you know a lot about, and just be conscious of what the difference is in what you're telling the audience when you're telling them the story about your band, or when you're telling them the story about what previous critics have said about your band, which might be a very, very different story from what you personally have to say about the band. And so you're putting your own views in the context, perhaps, of what those previous writers, those previous critics have said. By all means, pause the video and have a think about that before you move on. So you might be thinking, I don't know what you mean, I don't know what I can include then. If I'm meant to be writing about the relationship between people and the environment, but I'm not writing about the relationship between people and the environment, I'm writing about what people said about that, what can I say about what people have said? Well, there are some examples on this slide. So an easy way to begin a literature review is to say there's been a lot written on this topic. Or maybe there hasn't been a lot written on this topic. Or maybe there was a lot written 100 years ago, but no one's writing anything recently. Or there's lots of recent literature on this, but really it only started 5 years ago and no one ever worked on this previously. It's a new topic, it's a new body of literature. And so if you look at this list that you can see on the screen here, there's a bunch of questions there that you could take as starting points for things to talk about in your literature review. So your literature review might say, yes, there's a lot of literature on this topic, and it's a very long-standing literature. As early as 1784, Jones, 1784, was arguing blah, 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 and as recently as 2021, Smith, 2021, was arguing that blah, 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 blah. You might then say how it's changed over time. Well, way back in the 18th century, this was really the focus of what the literature was interested in. They were concerned with these kinds of aspects of the topic. Whereas more recently, there's been a shift, and nowadays, of course, people are really interested in this aspect of the topic. Moving down the list here, that then throws up, well, there are these different aspects of the topic. In the old days, people thought that, then there was this and that and the other, now we look at that. So yeah, this is really what the topic's all about, and this is how people have looked at it differently over time. Does the literature all say the same stuff? No, you might say this is a very controversial area. Different writers, different scientists, different people have said different things about this either over time or maybe in different places. Maybe North American authors have one standpoint, whereas European authors have another standpoint, and South Asian authors, for example, have yet another standpoint because of the different angles from which they're viewing the different angles from which they're viewing the topic. So there might be controversy, or no, there might be a great deal of consensus in the topic. Inevitably, if there are big names in this subject, or authors, writers, workers who've done a lot of work, you'll pull those out and say, yeah, this chap has done a lot. This group, they've done an awful lot. This scientist, they've done. These people, this group, and this, they haven't done. So by all means, well, certainly mention those big names, the people who've done the big work. Make sure you include those in your literature review. And you might then think it's appropriate. It's going to be different for each of you. This isn't a list of things you must do. These are just ideas. It might be appropriate then to look into the future. Well, given the trajectory that this research has been following, where do you think it's going to go next? What are the gaps in the literature that it would make sense for somebody now to study? You might say, well, people have looked at this, that and the other, but no one's ever looked at this. So this is a bit of this topic that is under-researched and deserves greater study in the future. That's the kind of thing that can emerge from a literature review. And when you're doing your dissertation in the future, that's exactly the kind of thing that can serve as a justification for your particular project. So you might say, well, there's been lots of literature on this, but there's a little gap here where no one's ever really done much. So the aim of my project is to do some research that can fill that gap. And that's a much more sensible aim than to say, oh, lots of people have done work on this, so I'm just going to do some more and throw my hat in that ring where lots of people have already done stuff. That's not so interesting. A gap in the literature, that's really important. So the aim of your literature review might be to identify specifically where are the gaps in the study of this topic. So a literature review can actually be a really interesting thing. The nature of the literature around a topic, very interesting. And as you're talking about that literature, inevitably you'll need to know something about the topic as well, so you'll be learning about the topic and learning about the literature at the same time. And you can get started now, really. I mean, you don't need to wait until the module has got going before you can really get going on your literature review, because you need to be familiar with the literature on a topic to get started. So go and explore the literature. Maybe start deciding which topics. Obviously, you need to decide which topic you're going to be following. But as soon as you can, decide on your topic and get into the literature. You don't have to read everything. For most topics, there's going to be far too much literature for you to read all of the original literature. So you can begin by reading previous reviews, for example. People will have reviewed the literature on a lot of these topics already, and so you could go and find journals such as Progress in Human Geography, Progress in Physical Geography, where people publish that sort of review, and get a bit of a quick catch-up before you then delve into more of the original literature. So you don't have to have read everything and know everything, but what you do need is a well-informed and well-organised opinion. We're basically saying, what do you think of the literature on this topic? What's your opinion about it? What's your evaluation of this previous literature? So you do need to know stuff. There is some work for you to be doing on that. I've just thrown in a common question at the bottom there. People often say, well, if I'm not reading everything, but I know about an article that I really need to mention, but it was in German in the 17th century and there isn't a copy online, and everybody mentions this paper, but I can't actually see it myself. Can I still mention it? Yes, you can. You can still mention it. And this is what we call a secondary citation, something that you haven't seen yourself and haven't read yourself, but you've read in another book or article about that earlier original article. So if the earlier original article, Jones 1728, is mentioned by Smith 2021, and you can't find that old article yourself, you can still say Jones 17 whatever it was, cited by Smith 2021, argued that blah blah blah, and you can talk about that old paper on the basis of what the newer papers have said about it, but you use that double citation approach where you cite that old paper, but you report that it has been itself cited by this more recent paper, which is the one that you've seen, and then you put both of those in the reference list. We'll talk about that in more detail nearer the time when you actually encounter this problem. You can talk to me or to your tutor if you have problems with the nitty-gritty of exactly how to cite your sources. If you have any questions about the essay, then obviously this isn't the forum for backwards and forwards question and answer. You can email me by all means, but that's something that we can cover very easily in our live Teams session next week. So jot down your questions and bring them along, and we'll deal with them next time. Okay, moving on briefly to the second of the assessments, the workbook. And the workbook is very straightforward. It's basically going to be a bunch of questions related week by week to the sessions that we're working through, and these questions will require short answers from you, 100 words or a diagram or maybe a list of references or something. There'll be short answers that you can produce, and you can do that as you work your way through the module. Again, it's a learning exercise. It isn't just trying to test what you've remembered from the lecture or something. It's designed to encourage you to go and find a little bit more information, to follow up what's in the lecture, to organise your thoughts very concisely, put them into the workbook, and then you can submit the workbook at the end of the module when you've done all the questions. The reason we're doing a workbook, partly is because we don't want to have an exam this year with the peculiar situation we're in, but primarily it's because a workbook is a really good way of allowing you to work progressively through the module and build things up gradually. Now you might be saying, I haven't seen the workbook, where is it? I didn't see that on the KLE. Don't worry, we haven't released it yet. I'm giving this introduction in week 1. We're planning to release the workbook in week 2 when you have that live Teams session at the end of week 2. So I'll talk about the release, and I'll hopefully be releasing the workbook at that time. So don't worry, you haven't missed anything if you haven't seen it yet. That'll be coming in week 2, and you'll then be able to work through the remainder of the module, providing a short answer each week basically to things in that workbook. Again, if you have any questions about the workbook, by all means, if you're panicking immediately, then email me and I'll get back to you. But you really don't need to panic. You don't need to do anything on this just yet for a week or so. But at the end of week 2, in our live session, I'll explain about the workbook, then hopefully release it there or thereabouts. And you can ask me any questions that you have. You can ask me in that live session at the end of week 2. So, just a few key points to note before we finish this little introduction. Like I said at the beginning of this video, these are what we call assessments for learning. Obviously we are going to use them as a test of how well you've done during the module, but that's not just what these are about. These are about helping you to learn. The assessments are designed to help you study, to help you learn, not just to test you at the end of it all. So you should be acquiring new skills and developing new skills by doing these assessments. They're a part of the module. They're not a bolt-on. So people sometimes think, oh, that session was just about the assessments. It wasn't a real part of the module. Well, of course it is. Doing the assessments is a fundamental part of your learning within this module. Second point, students often seem to think that the assessments are somehow set up as traps or tricks or things to trip you up so that we can say, you didn't know that, we'll knock some marks off. That isn't the idea at all. The assessment is designed to help you learn, and then to help you to demonstrate that you have indeed learned and that you can communicate effectively and that you do know something about the topic. So if you work through the instructions, do what you're told to do for each of the assessments, do the necessary work, there aren't any traps or tricks to trip you up. So hopefully you should all do very well on this. And also, of course, we're here to help. If you need any help at all, I'm the module leader, so you can always contact me and I'll give you whatever help that I can. If you have a geography tutorial group, your geography tutors will be pleased to help you. If you don't have a geography tutorial group, then you can treat me as your geography tutor and I'll be pleased to help you. So there's the same support is available for everybody. It might be through a different geography tutor or it will be through me if you don't have one of those. And you can just approach us for help whenever you need it, and we will try to resolve your issues as smoothly as possible. If you don't know who else to contact, just contact me and I'll sort you out. So what to do next? Well, you can get started on your preparations for the literature review essays straight away. You can start doing some reading. You can look through the module topics. You can choose topics that seem particularly suitable to you or interesting to you. Do some preliminary reading on those and decide which ones you think would make good subjects for your literature review. Go and find some guides on how to write a literature review. I've put some notes up on the KLE that you can look at, but there's lots of literature in the library about how to write literature reviews. So by all means have a little look at that, and I'll find some good items and stick those up on the KLE for you as well. And there'll be more information about the workbook in the week 2 live session. So you can start the literature review process now, by all means, get started, off you go. And you can start the workbook process, all being well, at the end of next week when I release the workbook and talk to you about it in the live session. So, like I say, we have our live synchronous session where we all meet up simultaneously. That should be in your timetable. I'll also make announcements about that, so keep an eye on your email, keep your eye on your timetable and the announcements. But make sure that you come along to that session, and we can use that as a Q&A, and I'll be able to respond to any queries or problems that you've got. And as always, further information is already being provided on the KLE and in the module handbook, and additional material will be provided as we work our way through the module. So keep in touch with the module units as we work through. Remember, for this module it's 2 units per week, so this is the 2nd unit in week 1, so I hope that you're watching this during week 1 or at latest in week 2 of the module, week 2 of the semester. But more information will be provided as we go along and is in the module handbook and on the KLE. So that's it for this session, other than to say, as I hope you enjoy. I know it sounds crazy, but I hope you do enjoy doing the assessments. It isn't like sometimes at school people hate the assessments and hate the tests. University shouldn't be like that. Doing the assessments and doing these assignments, that's part of the fun, part of the game of learning at university. So I do hope you enjoy the assessments, and I hope that you learn a lot by doing the assessments. That's the idea. As I say, if you have any questions, then please just ask. Okay, thanks very much.